Good morning. Today is Thursday, March 11th. This is the second half of the morning session of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. It's 10 a.m. We're turning now, though we do not have possession of Bill S-101 and an act relating to promoting housing choice and opportunity in smart growth areas. There is a sections 10 and 11 of that bill that the Economic Development Committee flagged for us to review because it relates to areas that we work on regularly in this committee. So we're doing that. And with that, and just for a goal for today, we want to hear from people. We have time to respond. So for now, we're just trying to hear from all parties. We don't need to come to any conclusions, but we do want to understand the issues as seen from different points of view in order to get ready to move forward. So with that, I'd like to, I'm turning, our witness list is evolving as we speak, but Mr. Weiss, are you now on the call? You're on the phone. All right. So you had requested an opportunity to speak to the committee. We have your testimony from yesterday. And for anyone listening, when the committee receives testimony, we circulate it to members and post it to our website. So we're always interested in hearing from people. And we treat testimony, whether delivered orally in person or delivered by email, in the same manner. It becomes part of our permanent record, and all members of the committee have it, and all members of the public have access to it. So I just wanted to make sure people knew about that accessibility. With that, Mr. Weiss, you asked to speak to us, I think, particularly about sections 10 and 11 in S-101. What would you like to share with the committee?
Well, thank you. I hope I've unmuted myself.
Yes.
Good. Good morning, and thank you. I'm Thomas Weiss, resident of Montpelier, and I do plan to talk on sections 10 and 11. I'm a civil engineer, and I have spent much of my career involved with planning and design of wastewater systems in Vermont. And as the chair just mentioned, part of the bill, sections 10 and 11, it deals with these types of systems, proposing to give municipalities the sole authority to authorize connections to their water supplies and to their wastewater treatment systems. The problem is that too many of these municipal systems too often discharge untreated sewage or untreated combined sewage, and I make the distinction between the two. And municipalities should not be given sole authority to allow new connections to systems that discharge effluent that is not fully treated. And CSOs, combined storm overflow systems, are acknowledged to discharge partially treated or actually mixed untreated sewage when they overflow. But there are also many systems that malfunction, and they discharge partially treated or raw sewage, depending on where the malfunction occurs, to the waters of the state. And as we know, discharges of untreated or partially treated sewage endanger the health and safety of individuals, and they have an adverse effect on water quality, and they impede our efforts to clean up our rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds. Many of our rivers are already impaired because of bacteria levels. Adding more flow to systems that already experience malfunctions and that discharge partially treated or untreated sewage will increase the levels of bacteria in these rivers. And there are also the accumulating pollutants. Phosphorus is one. As we know, it accumulates in the sediments and continually recycles into the algae blooms and lakes. Treatment facilities remove phosphorus, so when they malfunction and discharge untreated or partially treated sewage, that adds more phosphorus unnecessarily. And I believe that a municipality whose treatment facility or collection system discharges untreated or partially treated sewage, or has a combined sewage overflow should be prohibited from issuing water and wastewater permits for connections. And this is not about compliance with a state permit, it's about whether water quality is adversely affected. My letter gives details of discharges of untreated or partially treated sewage in 2019 and 2020. The important point is that half the municipal systems with direct discharges have had overflows in the last 2 years. These are overflows due to malfunctions. And 1/6 have had overflows in both years. Our existing infrastructure, as we're aware, is in poor shape. The American Society of Civil Engineers, the Vermont section, issued its most recent report card for Vermont's infrastructure in 2019. And the report card found that drinking water earned a grade of C-, stormwater earned a grade of D+, and wastewater earned a grade of D+. The report card has 9 categories. The above grades are the 3 lowest on the report card. Until we can bring the grades up, we should be very careful of relaxing the authority for issuing connections to water supplies or wastewater systems. Also, municipalities have an inherent conflict of interest. When the decision is to add more connections to a sewage system, which has priority? Is the priority to allow additional tax revenue and user fees through growth in the municipality and increasing pollution downstream? Or is the priority protecting somebody else's downstream water quality and forgoing additional growth in their municipality? Given this choice, municipalities, I believe, should not be the sole determiner of whether to add more connections. And the bill places no requirements on municipalities to ensure that their system has capacity for additional connections. There's no requirement that systems be in compliance with their existing permits. There is no requirement for a municipality to demonstrate to DEC or anyone else that it has the safeguards to authorize connections. And municipalities already have a procedure to issue these permits. A municipality may request authority to issue permits for service connections. Thus, there is no need for Sections 10 and 11 of the bill. Let the municipalities use the alternative procedure that now exists, and that alternative procedure is at 10 VSA Section 1976. The procedure there requires municipality to follow the provisions for issuing potable water supply and wastewater system permits. And it is the requirements in that section are more rigorous and more protective of water quality than the provisions in S101. And I ask that you prohibit a municipality from authorizing a connection to or an increased discharge from a wastewater treatment or collection system that is subject to overflows of municipal sewage or combined sewage. One way to do this, the way that I'm proposing, is to remove Sections 10 and 11 from the bill and adding a condition in 1976 that the permit has not expired and that there are no releases within the last 10 years of untreated sewage, of partially treated sewage, or combined sewage from the wastewater collection or treatment system. It turns out that there are 89 wastewater treatment facilities in Vermont that have permits for direct discharges. 39 of those permits have expired. The oldest of those expiration dates was in 2008, almost 13 years ago. I also point out that this topic was brought up last year, very similar, in Bill S-237, and the provisions were removed from S-237 by an amendment on the floor, the amendment introduced by Senator Sirotkin, chair of the Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee, and was passed on a 28-0 roll call vote with 2 members not being present. So I think there are some serious problems with our wastewater systems and the controls on those systems. And I think that sections 10 and 11, as they are written, will not improve those conditions and has potential for making things worse. And I also suggest that you could support spending some of the upcoming round that we hope to get of the COVID-19 relief funding at putting people to work building improved wastewater collection and treatment facilities. And thank you for taking the time to hear these comments.
Thank you. Any committee questions for Mr. Weiss? Senator Campion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Great testimony. Thanks for raising these issues. I think we all share the concerns. I also just want to thank you for flagging for the committee the possibility, and I thinking about this as it relates to education, and I'm sure the chair is also in contact with approach that there may be dollars coming in that would help us to take on that lift of updating what we all consider to be infrastructure that desperately needs to be updated throughout the state. And I think we should be working with appropriations hand in glove at this point to see if where that falls within those priorities. So thank you for flagging that.
You are welcome.
Yeah, the line, I think we've, the line in an article I read this morning about the money coming to Vermont at the moment and anticipated to come. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I know that people have been interested in making investments to upgrade. And then municipalities are already have stressed budgets. So there's a constant tension between trying to improve facilities and do it in at a cost that's tolerable to the ratepayer, the citizens of that town, in terms of taking on additional debt, for instance. So let's hope that the money that comes from the federal government lets people do more work. I do have a quick question, Mr. Weiss, on your last, you have a proposal around no releases within the last 10 years of untreated sewage, partially treated sewage, or combined sewage. Since you're good at looking at data, did you screen the portfolio of wastewater treatment facilities to see how many would currently pass that test of 10 years without any of these kinds of events?
I haven't gone back 10 years, and 10 years is, I'll call it a placeholder. That's a term you guys use a lot, as just some kind of a limit. As I mentioned, it was almost half. As I said, there were 89 municipal systems that have direct discharge permits, and almost half, it was 36 or 39, something in there, have had a malfunction causing a discharge over the last 2 years. So it would be a very large number.
Okay.
A very large percentage. And so if it were extended back more years than that, it varies from year to year, which ones are on the list based on my evaluation of 2 years. So my guess is over 10 years, it would be a lot more than that.
Okay.
But the number of years could be under discussion.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much for your testimony.
You're welcome.
With that, I'd like to turn to the Agency of Natural Resources and Ms. Polizek, Mr. Redmond. I don't know if you want, you're listed in sequence, but and Commissioner Walk, you're listed in sequence, but feel free to use this block of time and move back and forth between yourselves as you see fit. So, Commissioner Walk, do you want to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Peter Walk, Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation. I just want to reflect on Mr. Weiss's testimony that we share concerns over ongoing releases from CSOs and from malfunctions. Those are long-term issues that we as a society need to address. And we are fully committed to working through those issues. I also agree that there's an opportunity for some significant investment in our water wastewater infrastructure as part of funding that is becoming available. We're still learning what that's going to look like, but we do agree that there is a great opportunity here, a once in a lifetime, if you will, opportunity to invest in those resources. The challenge from my perspective is that they become once in a lifetime opportunities, and we don't have the ongoing necessary investment in those to maintain those systems into the future. So I also want everybody to be eyes wide open going to that. That's part of the reason why we're here, is because there isn't sufficient investment in those over time as we go. So I would like to defer to Brian and to Amy to provide some information to you. First from Brian on what our existing permit does and how that works. And then for Amy to provide some information to you as to sort of how the issues that Mr. Weiss has raised are treated, how they're separate, how they're different, where they come into play together, and why the concerns that Mr. Weiss has raised are not as strong from our perspective, because they're related issues that aren't actually overlapping from our perspective. And so I'd like to start with Brian and then move to Amy if that works for you.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Walk. Good morning. For the record, my name is Brian Redmond. I'm the director for the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. And as the commissioner just stated, this issue sort of spans two separate jurisdictions within the department. On the connection permit side, the permitting responsibility is with the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. And on the discharge side and facility regulation, that is with the Watershed Management Division's wastewater program and Amy Plachek's program. Just to start, we've worked closely with ACCD and VLCT and other stakeholders on the development of the municipal registration program to approve water and wastewater connections and are supportive of the bill. As Mr. Weiss had mentioned in his testimony, there is a process currently in our wastewater rules for delegation and partial delegation. It's the partial delegation piece that provides the pathway for municipalities to approve water and sewer connections. But we have heard from stakeholders that process and some of the requirements attached to the process itself have basically created a barrier to the pathway for municipalities actively pursuing that. So much so that we actually do not have any current municipalities enrolled in our partial delegation program.
And that's the 1976. Sorry, pardon me. That's the 1976 provision. Thank you.
Correct.
Okay.
So we wanted to work with stakeholders to come up with a more streamlined approach that will allow for municipalities, for those that choose to do so, to assume responsibility for approving connections. From the connection side of the equation, one of the key provisions for us was that the municipality would assure responsibility to ensure that the technical standards and the rules are complied with the installation for these types of connections, and that this documentation confirming that the installation confirms with the technical standards that they were adhered to is filed in the land records. So those from the connection side of the house was a very important provision for us, that we were basically transferring responsibility from what currently exists from a licensed designer or a consultant designing and the agency permitting to the municipality to assure that those technical standards were adhered to. Just a few quick.
Mr. Chair?
Senator McDonald.
We're talking about making sure that technical standards for getting waste into the system is a solid and proper connection to put that waste into the system. Is that what we're talking about?
Correct. Things like isolation distances, pipe size,
Okay.
pipe materials, things like that. Correct.
Is there a current problem with that today?
No current problem. I think what's the important point is that the standards are adhered to, so there's no resulting substandard installation. Is the key.
Yeah. So Okay,
Just
so that's not the problem. Okay, thank you.
not the problem, but it's a key feature to this proposal.
Okay,
And thank you, Senator McDonald. Just to make sure I'm dotting the i's, crossing the t's as we work through this. So any municipality would have to follow the very same specifications or standards, whether if they're delegated, they meet the same standard as what the state would require if the state were actually out there doing the permitting.
Correct, for the
correct?
connection.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. All right. So functionally equivalent. It's a question of who's doing, who's authorizing the connection, but the specification of how it's connected, that stays the same.
Correct. One set of uniform technical standards for the connection.
Thank you.
Just 2 points related, specifically more related to Mr. Weiss's testimony, and I agree with everything that the commissioner just stated. But one point is that it's the major storm events that are creating the overflows, not necessarily the connection permits themselves. So that was point number one. And the second point, more directly related to our role in this issue, our role being the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division, is under the current process for the state issuing the connection permits. We are relying on the municipalities to tell us that they have the hydraulic capacity to serve the intended use. And there's not a point in the process right now where we're denying connection permits based on a community having CSOs. So that's not a current feature in the current A&R process for issuing connection permits.
Right. And can I check in on that? So my lay understanding is that CSO events are such high stress events on the system that the system, in order to prevent damage, allows for diversion. And that's by design, and that those instances don't bear much of a relationship to the ordinary function of the system and whether or not it has capacity to handle the businesses and residences on that system. The failure would be, well, I don't want, failure is maybe the wrong term. The CSO event would happen regardless of the number of homes and businesses on the system, because it's stormwater that's driving the CSO event, not the higher or lower number of businesses or homes on that system. Is that lay picture? I'm not saying it right, maybe, but that's what's going on.
Correct. Amy, maybe this is a good time to transition into you to handle this question in more depth.
Thank you, Brian. For the record, my name is Amy Polacek. I'm the wastewater program manager, specifically the wastewater management program in the watershed management division. And yes, Senator Bray, your understanding is correct. In fact, the collection system is in general are well engineered in wastewater collection throughout the state to receive dry weather flows, that is those sanitary flows from home and business connections, but often not at a capacity to collect the stormwater flows that that larger storms can tend to present to the system. And that's when the overflows occur. Right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I'd like to address your questions as you have them, but I can also speak more generally.
Okay. Well, a quick question. The other piece is that, because this issue's come up for years in this committee, is that the best response to CSO events, well, I shouldn't say best, one of the stronger responses is to prevent them from occurring by not having so much water enter the system. So some of it's separation, but that even more than that, to try to get water to not, to have water slow down and soak in rather than enter the system either way. So I know that we've been making green infrastructure investments for years, because my understanding was that sort of hard infrastructure investments would be very costly and would never deliver a complete solution. Is that fair?
That's a very fair understanding of the situation. And those CSOs throughout the state that were the easy ones to disconnect or separate or have been taken care of, which in the 11 remaining municipalities that have combined sewer systems with active outlets, these are the places that it becomes more challenging to implement abatement processes. And so what we have, what we're implementing now is the 2016 CSO rule, and that's being implemented through enforcement orders to each of the municipalities. And we require long-term control plans for planning and funding those projects to come into compliance with the 2016 rule, which indicates that facilities must not discharge CSOs that exceed water quality standards. And so those are actively being drafted. Many are already in place.
All right, thank you. So I've interrupted with a few questions. I want to make pause and say to you, Ms. Polachek and Mr. Redmond, if you have other things you wanted to share on your notes, let's get back to make sure that we hear everything you wanted to convey to the committee this morning.
I just have two other things that I'd like to address from Mr. Weiss's testimony, in addition to concurring with my colleagues and Mr. Weiss of the need for investment in these issues. First, to address the expired permit backlog of municipalities, we do recognize and are working daily to improve that issue. Many of the expired permits were held over due to the Lake Champlain total maximum daily load, or TMDL, implementation, and are now on the schedule for renewal. And so that held us back, as well as a large turnover in staff. So we continue to push at that backlog on a daily basis. And to clarify, an expired permit doesn't mean that a facility is no longer permitted, as those are administratively continued and remain in force well after the expiration date. And another thing to point out is that in 2016, Act 186 required wastewater facilities to do reporting within 1 hour of determining or suspecting a discharge that exceeded their permit limits, particularly for E. coli, where they're required to report if they expect that they're exceeding the beach closure standards. And so I just want to point out that that reporting has caused an increase in reporting of these events, which is valuable for us to be aware of anytime there is a potential issue at a wastewater plant, but they may not always lead to permit exceedances because of the way that the reporting is required.
Right. Thank you. I have, this is a Senate Natural Resource Committee nerd item. I'm on your alert list, so I can tell how hard it's raining around the state as these things go off. Okay, thank you. And one quick question about permits expired and were continued. How dramatically do permits change? I mean, I can imagine someone might just first hear, oh, they have an expired permit, but they're continuing to operate under the terms of the existing permit. And do permits change significant? Can you characterize anything about how permits change? Like, are we delaying making an important change because we haven't issued a new permit, or do these things evolve in subtler ways? I have no idea.
I would say, Mr. Chair, it's both. The changes to any water quality standards that have occurred during the period of time since the permit was last renewed. So we look to the current permit, the current water quality standards to renew the permit. However, the major limits on a wastewater treatment facility for organics are technology based. And so those remain the same because they're federally technology-based limits. Then we often will have some changes based on small changes to the water quality standards. These days we're seeing changes in chlorine limits that we're enforcing, ammonia limits, and those are the main differences that we see as we renew permits.
Okay, thank you.
In addition to the phosphorus TMDL implementation.
I didn't, Mr. Chair, I didn't understand what I heard, what was said. I didn't understand what it means. It means that when it comes to putting more stuff into the wastewater system, the federal government has guidelines that are followed. Is that what that meant? So
that's correct, Senator.
So what does that have to do with putting more waste into systems which are failing and making them less efficient and more polluting? What's the connection? Is that the reason that we're doing this, or is that the excuse for doing this? That the federal guideline doesn't hold us to any standard?
So, Senator, I was just trying to clarify that when permits are renewed, that the changes are generally fairly minimal. It depends on the changes to the watershed potentially, but the majority of the wastewater permit has limits that are federally prescribed. And so those limits do not change from permit cycle to permit cycle for a facility.
So the testimony is that the federal government doesn't mind, care, or prevent us from putting more and more waste into our municipal systems that are not capable of dealing with it, and that's okay according to the feds.
Well, to clarify further, these are the effluent limits for the wastewater treatment plant. The treatment plant is designed to receive a certain strength of waste and a certain volume, a hydraulic volume. So long as the treatment facility is working within that design structure and framework and meeting their effluent limits, that they are complying with the requirements of the permit.
So it's the permits and the system and the regulations say it's okay to discharge this additional stormwater and wastewater into the streams, and there's no, well, it might not be what we would like to happen. It's okay because that's what the rules say is permissible.
Amy, if I might jump in here, I would
Thanks,
just,
Peter.
Senator McDonald, I think
Please.
you're conflating a couple of different issues here. We're talking about the system limit on the wastewater treatment facility itself as the permits that Ms. Blodgett is discussing and where we are in renewing those permits. You're discussing the CSO component of the overall wastewater system, which all of those CSOs need to come into compliance with the 2016 rule and have those long-term control plans in place. They're separate issues that I'm trying to just extract from the way you're conflating them.
Okay, well, when you line up the separate issues, Mr. Chair, what we're now doing is putting more and more sewage to be treated into plants which are failing routinely to treat the sewage.
So it is not the plant that is failing to treat the sewage.
It's not the plant that's failing to treat the sewage. It's the system.
It is the increase in stormwater events that is leading to increases in discharges from our combined sewer overflow systems. That is the issue that you're discussing. It is not a failure of the wastewater treatment facility itself.
So we're blaming this on Mother Nature?
We're discussing reality, Senator. The reality is we have increased storm events. We need to address these CSOs. The issue of increased capacity and this specific condition of the proposed legislation, it doesn't have any bearing on, it doesn't have significant bearing on either of the two issues we're talking about, because it has to continue to be within the design flow of the facility, and the municipalities have to work towards continuing to address their CSO challenges.
So Chair, thank you. What we're proposing to do appears to me to be counterintuitive, but maybe I'm missing something. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And my original question was just directed at trying to understand if a permit renewal was delayed, what kind of unintended consequence might that create? And thank you, Mr. Polachek, for the answer on that. Senator Campion.
Thanks. Mr. Walk, it might be too early to answer this, but just back to the conversation about these one-time investments in infrastructure, and this really probably wasn't on my radar as much as it should be in talking with our colleagues in APROPS, and I suspect the chair is probably 3 steps ahead. But I'm wondering if you have a sense yet of what might be coming in to address these kinds of things. Are they on? It sounds like they're on your radar also, which gives me comfort. And just so, do you have any information that you might share at this point?
So I think the challenge from my perspective is that there are lots of potential pots. The money that is coming in the current form of the recently passed and soon to be signed American Relief Plan, recovery, whatever the R stands for, I believe has the potential to offer resources on a number of things. But from what we understand in working with the delegation and the leadership of Senator Leahy and Senator Sanders in really being able to drive much of this, is that there's more infrastructure directly related proposals coming that could be used here. So I think there are a number of, we've sort of been asked for a number of different sort of suggestions as to where some of these investments might occur. And these types of investments in our drinking water and our wastewater infrastructure are exactly a great focus. They're job building, they're community, they lessen burdens on communities, they allow for appropriate scaling of different aspects. So there's a number of benefits here. And so I guess I just don't have specifics for you yet, but it's coming.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Thank you for that.
Okay, Mr. Commissioner, I don't know if you and your team have anything else you'd like to share with us right now, or if any members of the committee have other questions. Okay, so I'd like then,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very, Senator McCormick.
Yeah,
sorry,
thanks.
I see your hand.
As I expressed yesterday, I have some real doubts about the wisdom of taking the protection of the state's waters and handing it off. But I've got to say that I don't think the state is doing all that great a job. It's not to scold A&R. Ultimately, A&R has to work with the resources the legislature allocates or appropriates. But I feel a little bit that I'm not standing on the most solid ground advocating for continued state jurisdiction when, the fact is we're allowing what we're allowing. I think I still come down on the idea that it is the waters of the state, and the argument that was made earlier about when a municipality has to decide between its own developmental advantages and the water quality of the municipality 2 towns down the river, that probably that's something that ought to be decided at a state level. But I've got to say, it is really dismaying that our waters are as compromised as they are. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Senator, if I might just anchor on one point that Brian mentioned, and I'm sure you'll hear more from Karen and from Jeff as they testify, but my feeling about the sort of state versus local oversight is, as Brian mentioned, we are relying on the communities now to affirm that they have the capacity. Right, so that what you are asking is what is being proposed in this legislation is a change that doesn't affect the evaluation of capacity. And so Senator McCormick, I hear you. We have lots of work left to do, but we all need to be in this together. And I believe our communities are consistent partners in that effort because they are on the front lines of that work. And so I understand the split incentive concept, but we are public policy experts. We need to be able to work within a system that has lots of different competing priorities.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further discussion with the agency, and we'll get to a more discussion phase as time allows it, again at the end, then I'd like to move on to Ms. Horn. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Senator. I'm Karen Horn with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And with me this morning is Jeff Wenberg, who's the newly retired Public Works Commissioner for the city of Rutland and has decades of experience around these issues. I'd like to just bring the conversation back, if I may, to the substance of what is in S101. The current situation is that if you are a developer and you are trying to build something that is going to connect to a municipally owned wastewater treatment facility, you have to get a permit from the municipality, and you also have to get virtually the same permit from the Agency of Natural Resources. You have to pay separate permit fees to get each one of those permits. So in the context of this bill, when we're trying to address a significant housing crisis in the state of Vermont, the effort is to try and make it a little bit easier to and less expensive to develop some of those housing units. And I would also mention that the goal of the state of Vermont is to provide for housing and development in compact settlement areas. And your wastewater treatment facilities and your water supply facilities serve compact settlement areas. So for a host of reasons, we're hoping that the committee will agree to this amendment. We've been working on the issue really for decades. And we do have a proposed amendment to the bill, and that is on page 12 of 13 at line 8. It says that the municipality shall only issue authorizations for a sanitary service line that connects to the sanitary sewer collection line that serves a single connection. And then a couple of lines down, the same with respect to water supplies. We would ask you to take out that phrase that serves a single connection, because as I think Jeff Wenberg may describe, in many instances, if you're going to connect a apartment building or a multi-unit building to wastewater or water supply, you may have multiple connections to that one structure. So I'm happy to answer questions. You may want to hear from Jeff Wenberg first, but I did want to just put this in context in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here. And I think that the relative danger to the waters of the state of Vermont from having one permit for connection versus multiple permits for a connection is pretty insignificant. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Miss, I just want to double check. I have a copy of the bill in hand. I missed where you were pointing to. Can you give me the page and line numbers again, please?
Yeah, so it's page 12 of 13, and it's at line 8, sub 2. The municipality shall only issue authorizations for sub A, a sanitary service line connection that connects to the sanitary service collection line that serves a single connection. And then the same with respect to water supplies, which
Right.
I'm,
So, okay, great.
and then
So
B, a
2A?
water supply line. Yeah,
2A,
2A
2B.
and B. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So if you want to pause, we'll go to Mr. If you don't have anything more to share yet, then let's switch over to Mr. Wenberg. Although first, any committee questions for Ms. Horn? All right, great. Mr. Wenberg, welcome back. Good to see you again. Did I hear newly retired?
Yes, as of the first of the year, Mr. Chairman.
Well, congratulations and thank you for doing that work for a long time, both state level and down in Rutland.
Well, I appreciate it. And I have to say, even though it was very last minute when Karen contacted me about your desire to take testimony on this morning, I very much appreciate the opportunity and thank you so much. This is, I'd rather do a gradual transition to retirement rather than a sudden hard stop. So this is good for me too. I had a chance to look at Mr. Weiss's letter, and I'm going to respond directly to some of the concerns that he raises, and then maybe add a few other comments that might go to some of the questions and discussion that you've already had. But first of all, Mr. Weiss, and thank you committee members as well. Mr. Weiss bases his entire argument on the fact that many municipal systems have experienced combined sewer overflows or unrelated, untreated, or partially treated discharges. But based upon my experience as former mayor, DEC commissioner, and commissioner of public works for Rutland, I think it's safe to assume that every regulated wastewater system everywhere will from time to time experience some form of untreated discharge. There is no possible way that any utility can monitor on a real-time basis every linear foot of its collection system. Failing that, and understanding that weather events, accidents, tree roots, flushable wipes, and fog, fats, oil, and grease, will foul pipes and pumps and cause backups that on occasion will result in an untreated discharge. It is unavoidable, and I think the question came up a little while ago as to if you had a 10-year period, how many systems would be eligible if they, have no events within a 10-year period. And I dare say, good luck finding one anywhere in the nation, because I don't believe you will. Mr. Weiss implies that permits for new connections to systems that experience these discharges should be denied, and therefore granting municipal utility the sole authority to issue them is a mistake. But since every system is prone to these discharges, following Mr. Weiss's logic, no new connections should be ever allowed anywhere. CSOs are different in that they're not a result of a failure or a backup that is unanticipated, but the system is actually functioning exactly as designed. CSOs only happen where the collection system serves the dual purpose of transmitting wastewater and stormwater to the treatment plant. And as Ms. Palachik has testified, there are 11 systems remaining in the state that have this situation, and among them are the largest ones in Vermont. CSOs are not caused by wastewater, as has already been discussed. They occur when stormwater flows exceed the hydraulic capacity of the collection or treatment infrastructure, thereby creating or threatening backups into buildings and onto streets. The excess stormwater and wastewater are allowed to be discharged directly to receiving waters in order to prevent these backups, and therefore, and thereby actually protecting public health. Now, additional investment, and I love the discussion regarding the potential application of these newfound federal funds to solving this problem. Couldn't support your comments collectively or individually any more than I can state. But additional investment is being planned, and these long-term control plans obviously are designed to lay those out. And they need to be implemented to minimize and manage CSOs. Rutland has already invested more than $20 million in this effort, and tens of millions more will be required. But CSOs are caused by stormwater, not wastewater. The idea that permitting a sewer connection for a new 3-bedroom home will somehow increase the likelihood or duration of a CSO event is ridiculous. In addition, as I have testified and documented on multiple occasions in the past, combined sewer systems, which by definition will always be prone to CSOs, generally do a far better job of protecting water quality than separated systems, even including the untreated CSO discharges. This is because substantial volumes of stormwater are treated at the plant in addition to the wastewater. Stormwater, as I'm sure you're all aware, carries nearly all the same pollutants as wastewater, although in different concentrations. Treating the stormwater as though it is wastewater ensures that when it is returned to the environment, it meets far more stringent standards than any current or proposed Vermont stormwater discharge regulation. Eliminating CSOs can only be done by eliminating combined sewers. And if we did that, water quality would decline dramatically. There is therefore no water quality benefit from either eliminating the risk of CSOs or eliminating the ability of utilities to issue permits for new wastewater connections. Now, that is not to say that we don't have to spend a lot of money, as I just mentioned, managing, controlling, disinfecting, and otherwise ensuring that CSOs are controlled and minimized. But to suggest that water quality would benefit by their elimination is flatly not the fact. In fact, water quality would suffer in those streams where combined systems discharge, at least systems similar to the one in Rutland, which the ones that remain are probably closer to that than the ones that have been eliminated. Mr. Weiss also argues that the bill does not require that the municipality ensure that it has capacity for new connections. It is required by the wastewater permit that the municipality ensure that it has capacity. The state does not question that or monitor it, except perhaps through its permit review, through its inspections and so forth. But the state does not provide that service and therefore cannot know when it issues its permit whether or not the utility has the remaining capacity. At this point, only the utility knows that, and the state ensures that through its permit. Mr. Weiss points out that the current law allows municipalities to apply for permission to issue state permits under this delegation provision. The provision was passed at my insistence while serving as Commissioner of Environmental Conservation under Governor Douglas, and it has proved to be an abject failure. In the nearly 2 decades since, I believe only 2 municipalities from time to time have actually used this, and I just heard that there are none, at least in terms of the partial delegation, that have ever taken advantage of it. This is not because communities do not want to do so. It is because, as you have already heard, that the administrative requirements are so onerous, it is completely unworkable. Mr. Weiss is correct when he states that the state has a legitimate interest in the operation of these systems. The state's interest is protected by the permitting, inspection, and regulation of the utilities themselves. If the discharge from the treatment plant meets permit requirements and the utility permits and regulates connections to the system properly, on what conceivable basis does the state need to review and approve each individual connection again? Only when a utility is unwilling or unable to review and issue local connection approvals should the state assume this responsibility. The state has all the authority needed to protect the waters of the state through the current regulation of the treatment plants, the collection systems, and the basic utilities themselves. The additional regulation of inputs to these systems adds nothing to this requirement or to this protection. Duplicative and sometimes contradictory permitting has created a nightmare for applicants and municipalities for many decades, and Rutland alone can cite dozens of examples. The agency, the league, and affected municipalities support the provisions in S101, and I urge the committee to do so as well. That concludes my testimony, and I can provide a written version of this to the committee after today's meeting.
Great. Yes, please. Thank you. If you could send it to Jude, we'll put it up. We'll post it on the page with this as part of this discussion. Thanks. I do have a quick question. Since you have had to wrestle with this, there are always limited dollars available for this kind of work. And I'm just curious to what degree addressing CSO infrastructure investments to manage CSOs compete with infrastructure investments in the wastewater treatment facilities themselves. Maybe that's a false choice and you always worked on both of them, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Mr. Chairman, there is a difficult tension, not only between the treatment facility requirements. Ours is undergoing about a 4 million, 3-point-something million upgrade right now. And there's also the collection system. As you know, many of the older communities in Vermont have aging sewer collection systems, and that they need attention as well, separate and apart from combined sewer overflow challenges. These also come into conflict with drinking water infrastructure, because these all show up in the same bill and are paid by the same check by the same utility customers for systems where you have both drinking water and wastewater utilities. So, the question is, okay, what's the highest priority? I and the league, and I do believe the agency, have been supporters of the concept known as, oh God, help me, Karen, integrated permitting, or integrated planning, or integrated permitting. I like integrated permitting. And that is bringing these CSO requirements, the drinking water requirements, the phosphorus requirements, the stormwater requirements, I shouldn't leave those out, all into one big pot. Doing the wastewater and stormwater ones together is relatively easy. Putting drinking water in there is difficult under federal statute. But even if you could just get all the wastewater ones in one place, and then evaluating on a community by community basis what the priorities are, because it's going to change from every single community. What's the highest priority in terms of protecting public health and protecting the environment? And what you can't do it all at once. There's not enough money and probably not enough time. So if we had to schedule this, what's the lowest hanging fruit we can get the biggest bang for the buck? What do we do first? What do we do second? And which of these things do we understand that we're not going to get to them for 15 or 20 years? And then basically have that all planned out collectively rather than doing it piecemeal. That is still not really an available capability, but your question, Senator, is right on the point. All of these costs and obligations come together for the very first time when they show up in the utility bill for the customer. And municipalities are faced with trying to balance all of these things and take maximum advantage of the funding and the flexibility that the agency, EPA, and the legislature provides.
Well, thank you. You were the one actually who taught me about the value of combined systems, to look at them in another way, because till the moment at which there's a bypassing and a discharge, they are filtering all the stormwater that a separated system does not treat at all. If just by, can you ballpark figure how often like the Rutland system is operating without any kind of CSO event? I mean, is it 10% of the time there's CSO hours or 1%? I'm just trying to have a sense of balance between the benefit of.
It depends on the season and how much rainfall there is. Last year was a pretty good year, although the events that we did have were pretty severe, but they were few and far between, which was helpful. But generally speaking, it's between 1% and 2%. 2% would be on the high end, 1% would be a good year of the total time of operations. And in terms of volumes, I actually have a chart that we ran some numbers a few years ago, and it shows the volume, a bar chart shows the volume of wastewater that was treated, I think it was in 2017 calendar, and that was around 1 billion gallons of wastewater at our treatment plant. And then the volume of stormwater that was treated at the plant, and that was 680 million gallons of stormwater was treated at the plant during the year. And then the volume of wastewater that bypassed the plant during all of the CSO events added together, and that was in the vicinity of 3 million gallons. So you've got 1.6 billion gallons treated, including the stormwater, and you've got 3 million gallons that were released untreated. If you look at the phosphorus benefits of that treated stormwater, and I'm going to take this off the top of my head, don't hold me to this, but the ratio is going to be correct. Approximately, we estimated approximately 1,287 pounds of phosphorus were removed from the stormwater, not the wastewater, the stormwater portion that the plant treated during that year. And the amount of phosphorus that went without treatment, the wastewater portion of phosphorus that went without treatment was 75 pounds. So we collected 1,200 and some odd pounds that would have otherwise gone had it not gone through the plant and had high levels of phosphorus removal. And we allowed less than 100 pounds of phosphorus to escape. So that is an indication of the degree to which combined sewers do an excellent job of protecting receiving waters from pollutants in urban stormwater runoff.
Okay. If it's not too inconvenient, if you could send those numbers along, that would be helpful. I know that we actually were looking at green infrastructure projects, and one of them happened to be in Rutland. It was a new parking lot with sort of a rain garden and sort of swales and things to slow water. And I think the estimated average annual reduction in phosphorus attributable to those measures was 6 kilograms, so 13 pounds or so, which it's not that you wouldn't want to get the 13 pounds out. And it seemed like the parking lot was much improved and there was a lot less runoff. But it's interesting to put it in scale that you're collecting 1,200 pounds. Okay. Any committee questions for Mr. Wenberg? Ms. Horn, I know that you were sort of retaining the right to the remainder of your time. Anything you wanted to chime back in on?
Thank you. No, thank you.
All right. Great. All right. So any committee questions for Ms. Horn or Mr. Wenberg? All right. So that's very helpful. I'm just looking to see if anyone has a question.
So
Senator McDonald?
I like most of us, I think I got questions, but I don't hear any answers. And is the course we're charting that, well, yes, the system doesn't work and it does pollute and the water's dirty, and we're going to continue to, and storms are one of the causes, and that's just life. So let's, move right ahead with hooking up more and more connections and let someone else worry about it later. Is that, what am I missing here?
Well, Ms. Horn can jump in. I know that, for instance, this committee talked with the city of Burlington. It did a bond for, I think, $30 million, roughly a year and a half ago, dedicated to wastewater and stormwater. I don't know if, and improving performance around CSO events. Mr. Wenberg has said 20 million. I know that last year we looked, St. J had invested 20 million. Ms. Horn, maybe you can chip in, or Mr. Wenberg. My understanding is substantial investments have been made and are being made, but that in the end, you're always coming back down to what is the tax capacity of the municipality, even though we have revolving loan funds that make money particularly low cost. So let me step out of it. I'll stop editorializing and let the people who do the work answer.
Thank you, Senator. Clearly, we have the continuing issue of upgrading and maintaining our wastewater facilities and our water supply facilities. These are programs that have been underfunded for decades. And we are now, by the state and the federal level, all the funds that go to upgrading of wastewater and water supply are loans, not grants. Well, but I do want to point out again that Vermont is looking at getting $113 million. Am I dropping some zeros? Anyway, 4 capital projects out of the American Rescue Plan, and we're very hopeful that those monies will
is that
be
the COVID
put
plan?
to pardon me?
Is that the COVID money?
Yes, that's the American Rescue Plan COVID money that if you look on the joint fiscal website, that's coming to Vermont.
I'm lost.
Anyways, so we'll be able to make some of those.
If we just have enough mass pandemics, this will be solved. Is that what we're saying?
What you have right now is the one-time opportunity to invest in those systems that we haven't had for a long time before. And we likely will not have again for a while, but I won't say never. And I would like to just pull us back again to the issue that's paramount in this particular bill, which is mechanisms to provide housing where the state wants housing to go. And that is not necessarily related to the issue of combined sewer overflows.
Mr. Chair, I want to apologize to Karen Horn, who was doing her best and to represent her folks. The state has the power to tax, to spend, and to regulate. And faced with this dilemma, we are allowing our regulations to become less restrictive because we're afraid or unwilling to tax and spend to deal with this. So it just seems like we talk a lot about cleaning up the rivers, and we allow more and more to get put in them than our taxing and spending prevents.
So I'd like to.
I think,
Yeah.
I think in this instance,
Yeah, Ms. Horn.
It's us, it's not
I think
it's
in
not Ms.
this
Horn, it's us.
particular in this particular instance, Senator, I think what you're doing is being less redundant, not less regulation, but less redundancy, which we think is all to the good.
Right.
And cutting the fees and cutting the revenues. Yeah.
Commissioner Walk, and then Mr. Wenberg.
What we're talking about here is the regulation of connections. What the concern that's been raised is the regulation of CSOs. There is no change to the regulation of CSOs as proposed in this legislation. Just want to clarify that point for everybody, so we're all clear on what we're talking about.
Thank you. And Mr. Weinberg?
Yeah, to reinforce that, I was Commissioner of Public Works in Rutland for almost 7 years. And on not one occasion did the city issue a connection permit that the state ultimately denied when they issued their permit. The state issued a permit every single time the city issued a permit. There was no difference in terms of the conflict, if you will, between those two. The state didn't say, oh, the city screwed up and you can't issue this permit. They were always issued. What happened was there was an additional period of time, sometimes up to months, that was added to the process that the applicant had to go through in order to get the second permit from the state. There were additional costs associated with the fees associated with that permit. There wasn't a single instance of a situation where something approved by the city was either denied or changed in any material way by the permit issued by the state. All it did was add time, bureaucratic complications, and cost to the applicant. And oftentimes the city would get caught in the middle because they would come to us and say, is there anything you can do? We got your permit, we got your letter, but we're still waiting for DEC's approval, and we can't go ahead and get our health department, if it's a restaurant, our health department permit until we have the discharge permit. So they're just stymied. And in some cases, this went on for months. So that's what this is designed to address. It's really in a housing bill, and obviously it would provide the same kind of relief for those who are developing housing. But there is absolutely no connection whatsoever in issuing connection permits to the system and the system's frequency, volume, or experience with CSOs. There is no connection whatsoever. CSOs are driven by rainfall and snowmelt. They are not driven in any way, shape, or form by wastewater connections or wastewater volume.
All right. Anyone else? So we don't usually use the yellow hand feature. I see Mr. Weiss, you have your hand up, I think. So I didn't know if you wanted to rejoin the conversation.
I did have my hand up. I guess I didn't withdraw my hand.
Okay. So do you have a comment you'd like to share with us before we wrap up on this morning? Okay.
I do not.
All right. Well, thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for assembling and adjusting your schedule so that we could have more time to hear from more people and look into this carefully. So if there are no more committee questions for any of our guests today, then I think we will pause on taking testimony on this subject in S101. But let me also ask the committee if anyone would like to schedule further testimony. Is there anyone that you've heard from that you would like to add? Senator McCormick? Is that, I don't know if you're unmuting to speak or, all right, Senator Campion and then Senator Weston.
Yeah, I would just, I think all of our email boxes have been filling up around this issue with folks from around the state. Concerned that we might be taking a step that could harm the waters of the state. What I'm just wondering is there somebody who is organizing this outreach that might want to come in and say something? I think that's my only question. I appreciate all the testimony today from everyone, and it has certainly been helpful to me.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
now I
Senator Cohen.
want to talk. I think we should, perhaps, I don't know if they want to speak, but perhaps we should invite James Ellers and perhaps we should invite Annette Smith. I don't know if they want to speak or not, but we might invite them. The people who've been doing some
Well,
work on this. There's also the Lake
sure.
Champlain Committee that we might want to hear from.
Okay, I'm going to write these names down and I will follow up. So the Lake Champlain Committee, Mr. Ellers, Ms. Smith. Okay, so we'll reach out and see if they're interested. Senator Westman. Did you have, I thought I saw your hand up before.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, my sense from going through this testimony this morning is that personally, so I'll just speak for myself, I think it's re-clarified the distinction between connecting to a collection system and CSO events. And I think no one in this committee wants to see a discharge. And we've been talking about CSO events and trying to improve performance around the state. And I think my overall sense is that this bill will have no detrimental impacts on those, where if we're lagging behind where we would all like to be, it's for lack of funding for the most part. And I think, as Senator McDonald pointed out, we're the appropriators. So I think at this point, if we really want to pick up the pace, we're going to have to find, my short answer is we're going to have to make it more affordable for more municipalities to make more progress. Okay. All right, so thank you to all the guests who came. I'd ask committee, you can all stay on, or I'd feel free to leave because you've got other things to do. You're invited to stay, but I just want to check with the committee. And so we have Senator McCormick suggested some additional witnesses. Thank you, Ms. Polachek, Commissioner Walk, and Mr. Redmond, Mr. Wenberg, Ms. Horn. So I'll reach out to those three and two people and one organization that Senator McCormick listed and see if they want to offer additional testimony. Meanwhile, we know the bill is going to have some time downstream of us. So if we felt like we wanted to recommend an amendment, we could get back to the committee. There was and just to flag one, Ms. Horn did ask us to consider amending the, as did I think Mr. Wenberg, that serves a single connection feature, because as I understand it, practically speaking, they're often not just serving a single connection when they make such connections. Like so I can get more of a clarification. I should have double checked with Mr. Redmond or Ms. Polachek before leaving. Exactly what that means. A single connection versus if you're connecting a multi-unit dwelling, does that still constitute? How do you do the math? You know, I'd just like to get that straightened away. Okay. And if so, we've voted out 109 as amended. Tomorrow we have some time scheduled to DEC has a housekeeping bill, just like the PUC. So we'll hear from DEC on their annual request for some edits to their statutes, and we'll come back to 102, the the food residuals and chicken and composting bill, which is still a little bit vexing, I would say, because the practices around managing the composting are only one piece of it. There's also the Act 250 consequences and the exemption that's granted by virtue of being a farm from municipal regulation. And so do people have any thoughts on, one of the things I try to remind myself to say aloud to really to all of us as a group is, what questions do we have? From whom do we want to hear to help us answer those questions? I don't know if anyone here has, Senator McDowell, you've been thinking a lot about this.
Get myself into trouble thinking about stuff like this.
Well,
The
you're in good company.
I applaud the effort to deal with solid waste, excuse me, to deal with food waste that in using chickens and providing soil amendments that increases the soil's ability to take in moisture and produce crops without commercial fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the switch in regulation, if we accept the administration's commitment that it isn't going to lessen the treatment of such proposed treatment by expanding the number of chicken facilities that provide the service, we'll take them at their word. And the notion that it comes part and parcel with an automatic entry into city centers, village centers, and village growth areas, because by virtue of the change is just poisons the climate between the urban our urban communities and our rural agricultural communities, and creates a totally unnecessary and harmful conflict that simply doesn't need to exist, and that we should be able to endorse this enlightened policy and keep it out of places where it doesn't rightfully belong, and not say, well, we never intended it for it to belong there. It just happened to be a byproduct of our statutes, which link farms with unlimited freedom from regulation. And declare victory and endorse this in 99% of the state's land areas, and say no in a helpful and supportive way in places where it would detract from the goals and create unnecessary conflict.
Well, it makes me think a little. There was, in a similar vein, we struggled with someone who was doing wood processing around 6 months of the year, basically right in a village center. And for anyone who's lived near that or operated such equipment, it's pretty noisy when you're sawing and splitting and stuff like. I mean, it was a commercial operation, and it was right in the village. It was basically in a neighborhood, and it's like we, as you say, we end up grandfathering things that somehow we tolerated for years. Now the laws say, well, we don't want to continue to do this, but once we call something farming, then people are there's a lot of latitude, a lot of power comes with officially being declared to be a farm. And I think my sense is we want to support the practice and we want it well situated. Not, we don't want to create the possibility for future conflicts. So it's not a no, it's a yes when well cited. And it's right now I'm having trouble seeing how we would express that in the law.
You just avoid the cultural wars when they don't serve a purpose. I was following a case in New Hampshire where someone was trying to wish to cut and prepare firewood in a dense residential neighborhood. They had a splitter and chainsaws, and I actually wrote someone and said, you know, they make electric chainsaws, and why couldn't you just say, yeah, go ahead and do it as long as you're using an electric chainsaw? And the reaction was, and I'm making this up. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. It was, real foresters don't use electric chainsaws. And they fought over that. You know, it just seems so simple to make the neighborhood and activities not conflict unnecessarily. And so I would hope we could find a way to say, this is new and untried, and it's kind of a quasi-farming and not quasi-farming, and say and respect municipalities that find this worrisome and unwholesome. Be able to zone for crowded residential areas that we encourage crowded residential areas and confine them to the 99% of the rest of the state where they would be perfectly, where they wouldn't run into similar resistance, and would be useful and productive and achieve much of all of the goals that have been put forth with it. So I'm just repeating the same thing. And I apologize to the committee for saying it twice.
Right. Well, you know, the other thing about the scale of this, that's, you know, I had to do the math. So I said, okay, if dump trucks from small to large run like 8 cubic yards to 22, split the difference, 15, how many 15 cubic yard dump trucks could deliver material to a site? And it was 133 loads. So that's almost like seeing a dump truck on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all year round. So it is not, you know, just sort of a cute backyard scale procedure. Now, to run a real business, yeah, that kind of volume seems totally manageable, but I would think you would want to be thoughtful about where you were running 3 dump truck loads a week in and out of a place. It wouldn't really be what you would expect your next door neighbor in a village to be doing, I don't think. Particularly with then you end up with other issues having lived on a farm.
Today I'm doing my Zoom work midway between City Hall in Montpelier and Vermont College. And if you drew a line between those two, which is house after house after house on road after road, it's about midway between those two places. And I'm looking out the window, and I went out and pasted, measured it from the edge of this dwelling to the neighbor's dwelling, and it was 14 paces, and the property line was, you know, in between. And they have chickens there. They raise chickens. And I said, would you be interested in, you know, in doing food waste for your chickens, and would you welcome dump truck loads of, you know, food waste be, you know, backed into your driveway dumped. And they just laughed, you know, you crazy? And I said, what do you think your neighbors would throw us out, you know? So why? There's no need to complicate a thoughtful use of food waste by not making a modest modification of the, but I'm going into the third time, so I'll quit.
Yeah. Well, so the things we talked about already, you know, one would be on just the rulemaking piece to set start and stop dates so it becomes something certain as opposed to just drifting. The other thing I put on the table, I don't know how people feel about it, was to sunset something, because that does have a powerful effect on refocusing attention. If there's a problematic practice and the sunset comes up, then people are motivated to solve it. If there's no sunset, I understand from a planning point of view, you'd like to know that you could do this. If you set it up, you'll be able to do it in perpetuity or whatever. So I admit there's a challenge built into it. But on the other hand, if you're following all the rules, you're not going to be, you won't have a problem. You'll probably also be grandfathered at that point if the rules were to change. So anyway, I don't know what people think about those provisions to tighten up the rulemaking and to sunset.
I would just say,
Senator Westman.
I hate the idea of food waste in a tractor trailer truck being lugged to Maine and then incinerated.
Yes.
That
So I want to find out more about it.
Seems terrible to me. So, you know, is this exactly what I would choose to do with food waste? Well, I'm not sure, but I certainly, one of the last things I would pick is trucks going to Maine to incinerate.
Right. Thanks. I have that down on my list of questions.
Do we know the percentage of trucks? I mean, that was sort of Pat mentioned anecdotally. Do we know what's happening there? I agree with Senator West. That's not what we want, but I would love to see numbers on that.
Yeah,
well,
me too.
And I would also say to you, I think it discourages people that when you go to my transfer station, it's $2.50 a gallon for food waste. And
that seems high.
And I think what you've got some people doing now is just throwing stuff over the bank.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good point.
So okay. I'm worried about what's happening with that waste now. At least this, somebody would be looking over their shoulder.
Right. Okay. I had the same question. I actually the food waste going to Maine issue, I think it came up in part, as I recall, more than a year ago, because Hannaford's accepted a contract with a Maine food processor. And so that created a large flow. I don't know if other people joined in or what. So we'll have, and I think this is coming through the Chittenden Solid Waste District, which invested in, I don't know if we helped them. I think we did, in buying a depackaging machine. That was part of the reason this stuff was going to Maine, because so much stuff food waste is still packaged one way or another. And there wasn't an ability to depackage in Vermont, and there was in Maine. So let's get new data, because I think we said, oh, well, that's not what we want. How do we address that? And I think we've made an investment in that area. Have we solved the puzzle or not? I don't know.
But I would just say, I think most people depackage their food waste. The most expensive thing that you can take to my transfer station now is food waste.
Right, at $2.50 a gallon. That does seem.
Yeah.
I don't know what, that's an interesting one. It'd be interesting to know what the rates are. I know I see in Front Porch Forum people offering pickup service And they usually provide a 5-gallon bucket, and then you get like 1 or 2 times a month pickups, or weekly, I guess, whatever. You set an interval. I don't know what the cost is there. Okay, so let's get some more information on what's going on out there. Regardless of how this other issue gets settled, I'd still like to learn, and hopefully we've figured out a better system for food waste than still shipping a significant percentage of things to Maine. There's also a large new biomass plant going online. I don't know if it's running yet. It's been taking years to come up, get completed. It's in Salisbury, Vermont, just south of Middlebury. And they are going to be creating renewable natural gas. And I don't know if they're piping it or putting it in trucks and bringing it to the Middlebury College campus. So, but apparently that is a $20 million facility.
When is that online?
Well, I thought it was actually already supposed to be online. I don't know. So I'll ask for a Salisbury update, because I think
it would be great
something
to hear
like
about. It would be great to hear about that and better understand it.
Okay. My sense of the scale of it is that if you had a handful of these things around the state, they could take a lot of the waste now. And I also don't know about the issues of if they compete with people who want to make compost. Right. So, all right. Well, thanks for hanging in and discussing and sorting through the testimony. Is anyone where we'll get 3 more witnesses on, or I'll invite 3 more witnesses on the stormwater and potable water connections issues in 101. And that'll put us in a place to be ready. If we concluded that there's an improvement to be made, a change to be made, something we'll talk to economic development and we can offer an amendment. And we're right on time because they haven't loaded the bill out yet, and then it's going to approach. Okay. Thank you everyone for channel surfing today. We have multiple irons in the fire. So we